All right, so this is part 2, and we're going to be working in your math book. If you want to grab your math book, we're going to be working on lesson 13, and that's in module 6. This should be on page 201. All right, we're working on adding decimals, and we're seeing how fractions and decimals really mean the same thing. So let's start with 3 and 24/100ths. This is going to be number 1C. If you're looking for where it is in your math book, it's on lesson 13. I guess I should write that. Lesson 13. And we're doing number 1C. Okay? 3 and 24/100ths plus 7/10ths. Now, the directions want us to add these together, and then they want us to rewrite this as in a decimal sentence. All right, so let's start here. We have different denominators, so we can tell right away that we can't add these together until we have common denominators. They have to be the same, right? So if I have 24/100ths, that means that I have 10, 20, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So I have all of these filled in. So if you want to picture 24/100ths in your head, that's kind of what it looks like. Now, could I change this to look like tenths and divide them to make that? Because whatever you do at the top, you have to do at the bottom, right? We kind of practice that, but there's no way that I can have 24 evenly go into tens evenly. So I'm going to have to change this 7/10ths into a hundredths. So one way I could do that is I could say, okay, if I, whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So I could say 10 times 10 equals 100. And then whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do the same. So 7 times 10 is 70. So I could change this or rename it from 7/10ths to 70/100ths. How does that really work anyway? Well, it's kind of saying that if I have 7/10ths, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. If I have these 7/10ths, could I cut it into 100ths? You bet I could. So initially, if I'm cutting it into 100ths, I'm going to have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 100ths. Okay, so that's how we're changing our denominators to be the same. Now we can add them together easily. We can have 24 plus 70, so 70 plus 24, and we have 7, 8, 9. We have 94 100ths, and we have 3 wholes already there. So our answer is going to be 3 and 94 100ths. Okay, now the second part of this problem is they want us to write this as a decimal. So how could we write 3 and 24 100ths as a decimal? Well, I've got to really stop and think about place value up here, right? Because I have a whole number of 3, so I'm going to plug that into my ones. There's this, because everything on the left side of my decimal is essentially whole numbers. And then I have this 24 100th. Now think of that word hundredth. Where is that in my place value? Well, I have my hundredths, but I need to have 24 of them, right? So could I write 24 up here in my hundredths? Would that work? No, you can only have one digit in every place value, right? So 24 is kind of like having 2 tens and 1 thing of 4, right? I'm gonna erase this and pretend like this is 24, just so you can see what I'm saying. I could have 2 tens here and 4 pennies in a sense. Whoops, 4 pennies in a sense. So 24. Now, could I draw this as 24 pennies? You bet. I could move these two tens over here and cut them into pennies or hundredths, and I'd have 24 pennies. Or I could rename it and have 2 dimes, 4 pennies. If you think of it in money, it kind of makes more sense. Okay, so you could make 24 cents with 2 dimes and 4 pennies, or you can make 24 cents with 24 pennies. Either way, it's kind of the same. But when you're writing 24 100ths, you have to stay in the hundredths, but you can only have one digit there, right? So you've got to have your 2 in your tenths and your 4 in your hundredths. That's kind of how it works. Okay, so here's how we're going to write this. We're going to write 3.24. So there's our 3.24, and we're going to add it to, here's our 7/10. Now think about, and I'm going to just do it in the original or we could write it as 70/100ths. We could. I guess it would be fine either way. So it would either be 0. We'd have to have 7 in our tenths. In our tenths place. If we wanted to write it as 70/100ths, what would that change it to look like? Well, I'd have to have 70 in my hundredths. So I could write it either way, but really it's the same thing. I either have 7/10, or if you think of it in dimes, how much is 7 dimes worth? Well, they're worth 10 cents a piece, so 70 cents. So I could have 7 dimes, or I could have it in hundredths and have 70 pennies. It's the same amount of money, it's just written a little bit different, right? So if there's 70 hundredths, because that 0 is there, I know it's hundredths. If there wasn't a 0 there, I know I would have 7/10, which is the same value, but just written either in tenths or hundredths. Okay, so now I can add these up, and whenever I add up decimals, I really need to stack them. All right, so I've got to rewrite them to stack them so that I can keep those place values lined up, so I'm adding the same value together. We don't want to add hundredths with tenths and tenths with hundredths or ones. Like, you've got to keep your values the same. You know that with adding and subtracting, if you don't have your values lined up in the right place value, then your adding and subtracting will be way off. Okay, so if we add 0.7, now I can see, okay, 4 plus nothing is going to be 4, and 2 plus 7 is going to be 9, and 3 wholes plus no other wholes is 3, so 3.94. So in a way, you can see how 3 and 94 100ths is the same thing as having 3.94, because our 94 is ending right in that hundredths place. We have 94 100ths. Kind of the same thing. We can look at this as 94 pennies, meaning hundredths. If we break it into pennies, meaning 100 to make a whole, or we can break it into having 9 dimes, 4 pennies. All right. Okay, so that's kind of the gist of the next part of your lesson, and we will move on to just adding just the plain old decimals on our next episode.